change of the appearance of other DOM elements. Okay? Neat. But again, we never want to use inner HTML if we can avoid it. And we probably prefer to use jQuery instead. All right, so what else can you do? Well, you can get all of the same elements on a given page. So here we go, a list of paragraphs. And I want to do document.getElements by tag name. Give me all of the paragraph elements. And now that I have this array of paragraph elements, what can I do with it? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is just see how many there are. So list of paragraphs dot length. Great. So this will show me how many I have. And I have 3 paragraph elements. Awesome. Let's comment that out. And let's see, how do we get at just one of the paragraph elements? Let's do this. Var second paragraph. So I'm going to yank off one of the paragraph elements and put it in its own variable, and then I can work with it individually. All right? Paragraphs. And the way I'm going to do that, since I'm working with an array, is I'm just going to work with the second paragraph. This is 0 base since it's an array, so I'm going to use the index of 1 to get to that second element in the array. And then I'll do alert second paragraph, and I just can't help myself. I'm going to grab the inner HTML again. I know. Kind of a rebel that way, aren't I? And there we go. We're back to the inner HTML of our second paragraph. Cool. All right, so we're able to get elements by ID. We're able to get elements by tag name. Can we get elements by class? Yes, sort of. There is a new method called get elements by class name as defined in the HTML5 specification. However, it's not supported in all older web browsers. And so you have a couple of choices. You could go off and create your own version of this that just basically looks through every element in the DOM and looks at its class and add it to an array. You can do that on your own, or just use jQuery, because that's what it does by default. jQuery uses CSS selectors to return an array, or a collection, I guess, of individual DOM elements that all have the same class name. That's what it's best at. So I would probably just say, don't do this, use jQuery instead. And I'll say that quite a bit, as a matter of fact. But at any rate, let's grab, well, actually, let's just comment all this out. And let's start over one more time. My element equals document.getElement by ID. And we'll pick on that second element again. Now, here's where we can start navigating through the document object model. Like, how do I find out what the parent of this element is? We can get to it through the parent node property, and then we can just keep using the dot notation to get to a property of an object, which is a property of another object. So node name, and save that. And if we look here, what we expect to see, what is the parent of our paragraph? The parent is this div, as we can see through the notation, or the indentation levels. So let's see if we get that result, and we do. The paragraph is a div. Awesome. All right, and I'm not going to demonstrate all these. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of make some more multi-line comments here. But we can navigate through the DOM in a couple of different ways, like my element dot find all the children, so all child nodes, and this will give me an array of children that belong to this element, and I can access it through, a 0-based index as well. After I find out exactly how many children are associated with that given element, if I needed to. All right, so let's just leave it at this for now. I can also get down to just the first child, or I can get down to the last child, get a reference to it. I can get to looking at this element. What is my next sibling? So who's my parent? Div. What are the rest of their children? Well, in this case, there's more paragraphs, right? And I can get to the previous sibling. And so that's what I'm doing with these methods as well, or these properties. Okay. Now, we've seen up to this point how we can work with inner HTML. We can actually modify just about any attribute of a given DOM element. So in this case, let's play around with the anchor tag. You'll remember the anchor tag on our web page has a href set to bing.com and has an ID of my anchor. All right. So let's play with that a little bit. var anchor equals document dot get element by ID my anchor. And now let's find out the destination of that anchor tag by checking its href property. And then let's go ahead and just alert that. Anchor destination. Refresh, and we can see that we were able to retrieve the attribute of the href. Now let's go a step further with this. Comment these out. And let's actually set the anchor. Now let's try just doing starting with something simple like href equals http www.learnvisualstudio.net, my website. Let's save that, and then let's refresh this. And so you can see I'm going to hover my mouse cursor over the anchor tag, and you notice in the lower left hand corner it says the current href is bing.com. I'm going to click me, and now I hover my mouse cursor over it, and it changed the href to learnvisualstudio.net. Awesome. Now honestly, in some older web browsers, it will not allow you to access either get or set a given property using the simplified syntax. In some older browsers, you have to do something like this. Anchor.set attribute, href, and then http://www.learnvisualstudio.net. Or I'd have to do anchor.get attribute, href, to do something like I did earlier. However, in newer versions of the browser, you don't have to worry about that. And again, if you're using jQuery, you probably don't even need to worry about any of this because they have their own means of setting and retrieving attributes. Okay. So at any rate, I think that pretty much ends the examples that I wanted to talk about for now, at least in this particular example. I'm going to comment this whole thing out because I have a bigger topic I want to talk about. And so now we do not have a live run the example. They're both commented out. All right. But we've talked about get element by ID, and we've seen a couple of other ways like get elements by tag name and get elements by class name, and other ways to navigate through the DOM using going parent node, child nodes, first child, last child, next sibling, and so on. And I just want to make it clear, once you start using jQuery, you probably never do it this way again, because jQuery provides a shorthand experience and a more powerful set of selectors for based on cascading style sheets. It makes it easier to navigate through your DOM. More about that in the next lesson. Don't want to bog down too much here. One other quick note, you can change styles in JavaScript. So I can add individual styles like change the font or the text color, the background, foreground, things of that nature directly from JavaScript. I didn't demonstrate that because I don't believe you should do that. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. What I think the more proper way to do it is define a CSS style, and then again, using jQuery, you can attach and detach styles from DOM elements, and I think we're going to demonstrate that later in this series as well. So I just wanted to address that since you might be thinking, ooh, I could style something in, you know, put a yellow color behind it as somebody clicks something. Don't do that. Don't just change one attribute like the background color. Change the class, all right? All right, so moving on, and before I wrap up, I want to talk about that wrinkle that we discovered earlier in this video when we needed to add some JavaScript after the DOM has been constructed. Our first real opportunity to do that was in our window.onload up here. And recall that window.onload fires off after all the images, video, flash animations, and so on have been loaded. All right, that's the problem. Because if it takes our web page a long time to download all those large images and video files and so on, then the user may see parts of the web page, maybe see all of the web page, waiting for images to slowly make their way into the browser and even be able to interact with the web page, but we haven't had a chance to wire up our JavaScript yet. And so our JavaScript is late to the party, so to speak. Somebody's already clicking around and doing stuff, and we haven't had a chance to really give the user the full experience because we wired it up too late in the process. So just to be clear, I want to oversimplify and create a diagram here of the problem. In reality, some of these things are happening in parallel, but don't miss the real point. The process begins with parsing the HTML into DOM. At some point, it's going to begin loading external resources like images. At some point, the page is partially rendered to screen. As the parsing of the HTML into DOM happens, JavaScript could be executing if we have any JavaScript in the page that references DOM elements. But it's not until much later in the process, until everything is finished, when the window.onload event is firing. And so it's this gap right here in the middle that's worrisome, because again, the user could be interacting with our web page, but we haven't had an opportunity yet to wire up the window.onload event, to wire up the other controls like we've done here, like the command on click, the button on click event, and so on. And so that's really where the issue is at. So as you might expect, newer web browsers support new standards. They have better support for this whole situation. There are new events available in newer browsers that allow you to tap into the moment when the DOM is ready. However, in older browsers, it seems like every browser vendor had a slightly different solution, so there's no unified way to really handle this. Now, there is an easy remedy for this situation, but I don't think we're going to like it very much based on what we learned in the previous lesson. As we saw earlier, we could mix our JavaScript code in with our HTML so that we can load bits of JavaScript right as it is encountered inside of the HTML page through the DOM parsing process. So you'll recall from very early on, we can execute JavaScript inside of the body of our HTML page. The code executes as it's being encountered, and it will execute so long as it's not interacting with a DOM object that has been already created and added to the tree. As long as that's happened, then it's available for manipulation. All right, so let me just illustrate this, because I may have butchered that explanation a tiny bit. So what we're going to do is uncomment out our run the example. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is comment out this. And I also think this isn't going to work. I'm going to get rid of all these. Otherwise, I'm going to be shooting myself in the foot here. And that should stay. All right. So, okay, great. So let's go ahead and save that. And then I want to keep this part because I'm going to use that here in my C9JS_13.html file. We're going to start here with creating a new script. Type equals text JavaScript. And we'll start by just putting that there. Let's save it. Now, do you think this will work? Well, no, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because this JavaScript code gets executed way before the instance of the click me input type equals submit is added to the DOM. All right, so let's just cut to the chase here and move this directly after we would expect it to be created in the DOM. So let's go ahead and save this, and now let's refresh this, and it works. All right, just to be sure there's nothing up my sleeve, let me cut this and put it right before that line of code, right before the click me button is created in the DOM. And nothing happens. All right, so yeah, so I could get this example to work and to not have to worry about this whole time gap issue like we saw on the slide a moment ago. But do you see the trade-off that I had to make? I had to mix JavaScript and HTML in the same document, and we spent a long time in the previous video explaining why we wanted to avoid that. So fortunately, this is one of those problems that jQuery will just solve for us, and we can learn that in the next video. But you know, the reason why this kind of worked when we were using window on load was our example web page was small. We had no external references to images, so I suspected I was pretty safe that the gap between the time when the DOM was finished and when the rendering of the page was finished and the window on load fired was minuscule. So in the real world scenario, however, this is something we want to be aware of because it has the potential to break our applications for certain users, especially those with dial-up access to the internet. Okay, so let's go ahead and recap and then finish this up. First of all, we talked about the document object model at length. We said it's the browser's internal mapping of elements on the web page to objects in the computer's memory, available for the express purpose of allowing JavaScript code to read and manipulate those elements. And we saw that you can use many built-in DOM functions to access one or more elements on the web page. You can also navigate through the relationships of the elements like parent, child, sibling, and so on. We looked at how to set properties and get retrieve values from the properties of each of the DOM elements. Several times during this lesson I said, hey, that's nice, but you'll never really want to do it that way because it's easier to do it in jQuery. So for example, selecting an element of the DOM is easier in jQuery than using the built-in DOM API, at least in my opinion. The same is true with events. The same is true with styling your events at runtime. The same is true with how we'll solve this dilemma that we were just finished talking about, where we want to write code as soon as the DOM is constructed, but we don't want to wait for all the images and everything else to load on the page. Waiting for the window.onLoad event could result in our JavaScript arriving late to the party, as I said. So, any rate, we learned quite a bit. We've gotten to the point where we're beginning to transition from JavaScript into jQuery, which again smooths over a lot of the rough spots that we've seen up to this point. And I'm excited to start really talking about it in earnest in the next lesson, and so we'll see you there. Thank you. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. In this lesson, we'll get started with jQuery. And jQuery is simply a library that's written in JavaScript, aimed at simplifying JavaScript and making it easier to write JavaScript that works equally well across all popular web browsers. And as a result, has become the most popular library, almost indispensable to JavaScript developers. It's often described as having four main concerns: DOM, AJAX, event, and effects. DOM, AJAX, event, and effects. Okay, and so you can kind of repeat that as a mantra if you want to, but let's look at each one of those and get a little better understanding of what that means. First of all, as far as the DOM is concerned, jQuery provides a cross-browser way of working with the DOM. This is the biggest advantage for most developers. The creator of jQuery once gave a talk entitled "The DOM is a Mess," and he said that due to all the many different implementations of the DOM by different vendors over the years. Compatibility issues between browsers have created a lot of headaches for developers. So in the past, developers might attempt to determine the capabilities of the browser and then write code based on what that browser will support. jQuery takes care of virtually all of these issues for you, so you can just focus on the functionality, not the underlying idiosyncrasies of individual browsers. And jQuery also provides a simplified technique for getting at DOM elements, as well as an easier way to traverse the DOM and modify the elements using a cascading style sheet syntax. So in the next video, we're going to start to look at jQuery selectors in more depth. As far as Ajax is concerned, jQuery provides simple methods that you can use to exchange data with a web server using Ajax without requiring a full page refresh. It gives easy ways to work with the data that's returned from an Ajax call. So if you don't know what Ajax means, don't worry, I'm going to be explaining everything that you need to know about it, I think in lesson 18 or 19. So for just now, know that jQuery makes working with Ajax almost trivial, so simple that anybody can use it. As far as events are concerned, first of all, jQuery provides a bootstrap script, I guess you could say, to access DOM elements immediately after the DOM is constructed and ready for use, but potentially before the window.onload has fired, which indicates, as you'll recall from the previous video, that all the images, any media files like Flash or movies, any other large files are finished downloading on that page. So at the very end of the previous video, I likened that to our JavaScript potentially arriving late to the party. The page has partially rendered, the user starts clicking around, but our JavaScript hasn't been attached to the events of the elements on the page yet because we're waiting for window.onload. All right, so jQuery solves this. Moreover, jQuery supports a simplified event handling model. So for example, you can add multiple events to a single event. You can easily remove events when you no longer need them. And so we're going to look at jQuery's event handling in lesson number 15 or 16. As far as effects are concerned, jQuery has built-in effects and animations. So things like fading in and fading out and hiding and showing, changing the CSS classes for a given element on the fly, moving elements around on the screen, and so on. And then finally, jQuery provides a rich extensibility model through plugins. And there are thousands of plugins for all sorts of purposes. There are light boxes and carousels and drag and drop and tabs and video players and a lot more. In fact, you can create your own, and we're going to look at how to include existing jQuery plugins in like lesson 16 or 17, learning how to create them on your own. Not covered in this series, but it's pretty simple to do if you have some functionality that you want to reuse on other projects or share with the entire world. So jQuery is an open source library that was developed over many years by volunteers. It's grown into a major concern, and as a result of its stability and its popularity and how vital it's become to web developers, Microsoft has now included jQuery in many of their templates for ASP.NET applications, and they regularly contribute to the project. They've expressed that they're putting their full support behind jQuery instead of developing their own JavaScript library, and I think that's a splendid idea, honestly. Okay, so hopefully I convinced you that jQuery is the direction that you should be headed as a JavaScript developer. There are many organizations, not just Microsoft, that are supporting jQuery to host the jQuery files, both the original or the development version and then also the production version. And they do this by distributing them on their Content Delivery Network, or CDN. So a CDN, if you ever heard that term, is simply a collection of computers that are redundant around the world. So when a request comes into a web server for a given file, say for example the jQuery library file, like we'll see here in a moment, it'll serve back to the user's browser the file from the server that's closest geographically to that user. All right, so that's the value of a CDN, redundancy, and then serving it up from a server that's geographically close to the end user. So let's do this at this point. Let's take a look at jQuery's website. Just go to jQuery.com, and let's take a look at the downloads. And you can see in the downloading jQuery, there's some deep links into this page. If we take a look at the CDN hosted jQuery, you can see that Microsoft has a CDN, and they have the minified version that you can use in your own web pages. They also have a non-minified version. We'll talk about what that is in just a moment. So you can also download jQuery and put it on your own servers if you want to as well, and you can see the download links right here. And note that, as I mentioned a moment ago, that there are two versions of jQuery. There's the development version, which is uncompressed, And then there is a production version which is minified. You can see the minified version just has the .min.js. And so the difference is basically that the development or the uncompressed version is the human readable version, and it's great if you plan on looking at the code yourself in an attempt to understand how it works. Otherwise, the minified version, it removes all extraneous characters like blank spaces. So it basically is reducing the file size, shortening the names for the given variables, and so on. And this is the version that you should be using when you're distributing your application for public use. So if you're one other little note here, if you're watching this series so that ultimately you can build Windows 8 applications using WinRT, then you must download the jQuery file and include it with your project, since you can't utilize resources over the internet without paying the penalty of reduced trust on the end user's computer. And I have a little reference here to a video that you can watch on Channel 9 that talks about this at length. Okay? But regardless of how you intend to reference it from your HTML file, you can write some code to test up if you wired it properly. And so at this point, you want to make sure that you grab the code from this lesson. It's probably all bundled up together. But what we want to do is take a look at the c9js_14.html page. So you can see I have a script tag that references the minified version of the jQuery library. It's identical to the script tag below it. The only difference is that in the tag below, I'm referencing the script14.js file where we'll write our JavaScript code that references the jQuery library. In the jQuery reference, you can see that I'm referencing Microsoft's CDN that hosts the file that I need. So take a moment and make sure that you've caught up to me and you have at least this much. Now we want to open up a script page in Notepad, and we just want to wire it up to make sure that jQuery is indeed running. So here's how we're going to get started. We're going to just type this in and we'll talk about what it does in just a moment. So jQuery, passing in a document, ready, and then we'll create an anonymous function. Inside of that, I'm just going to type here, startup code goes here, and we'll just do alert. This works. Okay, so let's save that, and let's save the other one as well. And so now let's just open it up in a web browser, and we see right away that we get the alert box pop open. So let's take a moment and look at exactly what it is that we did here, because I'm sure this syntax looks foreign to you at this point. But it's just based on everything that we've learned up to this point, and so there's nothing really here that should blow us away as long as we understand some of these keywords. All right, so first of all, you can see there's this jQuery, and it has a pair of parentheses and the word document inside of it. So this is called the jQuery function. It accepts a parameter that's called a selector expression. In this case, I'm sending in as the selector expression the entire document, or rather the entire DOM. All right. If you remember from the previous lesson how we had the hierarchy of objects in the DOM, window owns document, which owns all of the individual DOM elements in our web page. So we're passing in the document and saying, this is the context. This is what we're going to be working with. And this will return a jQuery object. And so once we have a new jQuery object with its context set to document, then all the methods and properties that we call will be in relation to that context. In other words, we're going to call the ready method next. When we call the ready method, we're asking jQuery to evaluate when the entire document, the entire DOM, is ready. And so when jQuery determines that the context, this whole thing, is ready, then we are going to execute this handler code that we've written inside. In other words, this anonymous function that we created. In this case, the anonymous function simply is popping up an alert box to screen. Okay? So what we can do also, because you don't want to keep typing the full word jQuery every time there's a shortcut, an alias, you can just use the $sign. So let's save that and then refresh our web page and make sure this still works. All right, and so this is a handy way of getting to the jQuery function as well as the jQuery object itself that's returned from the function whenever we need to work with it. And you'll see that used often in jQuery code.